In a small village, surrounded by towering mountains and dense forests, there was a young man named Samuel. Since childhood, Samuel had always felt that his destiny was intertwined with something greater. He observed the wise ones of the village, men and women who, through their words and actions, seemed to guide the community and dreamed of one day being like them. However, the last few months had been a whirlwind of uncertainties. Doubt haunted his thoughts, and the pressure to conform to the expectations of others made his internal journey even more challenging. As Samuel walked along the dirt roads, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. His family expected him to inherit the property, and many in the village looked to him as a potential leader. But in his heart, there was a yearning for something deeper. He longed for purpose and clarity, for signs that indicated he was on the right path. The desire to understand divine plans accompanied him, and he often wondered if the difficulties he faced were part of a greater plan or merely the result of his own choices. Amidst this emotional turmoil, Samuel began to notice small signs around him. One day, while helping an elder in the village, he heard a story about a traveler who, in his search for purpose, found unexpected directions in moments of pain and joy. That narrative resonated deeply with Samuel, as if it echoed his own internal struggle. He remembered how the elder's words, filled with wisdom, seemed to be an invitation to explore his own journey. In that moment, hope began to blossom in his heart. Meanwhile, the village was also facing challenges. The harvests were scarce, and the community felt the weight of adversity. However, there was a spirit of unity among the inhabitants, who gathered around bonfires to share stories and encourage one another. This atmosphere of solidarity and faith might have been what Samuel needed to find his way. The young man began to realize that the signs he sought were not just isolated answers, but part of a broader picture that involved not only himself, but the entire village. Samuel's expectation grew as he became more engaged with the community. He began to wonder if the challenges he faced were, in fact, disguised opportunities for growth and learning. What else might be waiting for him beyond the known borders of the village? Could it be possible that God was communicating with him through daily interactions and shared experiences? As he walked along the river that wound through the village, the waters reflected the sunlight, creating a mesmerizing spectacle. Samuel paused to contemplate the beauty around him, feeling a renewed connection with creation. He knew that if he was willing to listen and observe, he could discover the signs that God was sending, confirming that he was indeed on the right path. Curiosity and expectation filled his being, and for the first time in a long while, he felt truly alive and ready to embrace whatever was to come. The young man, in his search for meaning, was about to embark on a journey that would transform not only his life, but also that of everyone around him. The signs he was looking for were closer than he imagined, and Samuel's story was about to intertwine with that of his village in ways he could never have predicted. Samuel sat by the riverbank, his feet submerged in the cold water as his mind wandered. His reflections on the future grew increasingly intense, and he wondered if he was prepared for what life had in store for him. What if he wasn't good enough? He thought, doubt creeping into his heart. The wind blew gently as if trying to comfort him, but the restlessness persisted. He remembered his mother's words, "Samuel, what matters is what is in your heart, not what others expect of you." Meanwhile, in the village, the days grew longer and the uncertainties heavier. The harvests were dwindling, and the dry weather made the soil barren. The atmosphere of worry was palpable in the conversations Samuel heard as he passed by the mud houses. "If it doesn't rain soon, I don't know how we'll sustain ourselves until the next season," a woman said to another as they washed clothes in the yard. Samuel felt a lump in his throat upon hearing that. The voice of the village, once vibrant and full of life, now sounded like an echo of despair. At one of the gatherings around the bonfire, Samuel decided to share his thoughts with his closest friends, Lucas and Anna. They had always been his confidants, and it was with them that he felt most comfortable expressing his insecurities. "Have you ever stopped to think about what we really want from life?" Samuel asked, the firelight illuminating their faces. Lucas, with his always optimistic demeanor, replied, "I just want the harvest to be good again. If that happens, everything will be all right." Anna, on the other hand, seemed more reflective. "What if what we want is not just in the harvest, but in the connections we make? What good is it to have everything if we don't have each other?" The conversation took an unexpected turn. Samuel realized he was not the only one feeling the pressure of expectations. "I feel like everyone in the village looks at me as if I have to be the next leader, but I don't know if I'm capable of that," Samuel confessed, his voice trembling. Lucas frowned. "We all feel that, Samuel. But maybe leading isn't about having all the answers. It's about listening and learning from others." Anna looked at Samuel, her eyes shining in the firelight. "Have you thought that maybe your internal struggle is what will make you a better leader? People need to see that you also have doubts, that you're willing to learn and grow." Samuel reflected on those words. He had always thought a leader should have all the answers, but what if true leadership was about vulnerability and empathy? Days passed, and the tension in the village seemed to increase. The farmers gathered in heated discussions about what to do regarding the situation with the harvests. Samuel watched, worried as the faces of his neighbors grew increasingly concerned. In one of those meetings, one of the elders, old Jorge, stood up to speak. "We need to unite more than ever. The crisis is not just about the crops, but about our unity as a community. If we don't help each other, we won't be able to overcome this." Those words echoed in Samuel's mind. He realized that while he was worried about his own future, there was something much larger at stake. The dilemma he faced was not just personal, but collective. He needed to find a way to help his village and at the same time discover his own purpose. That night, as he walked home, Samuel noticed something different in the air. There was a smell of wet earth, and the breeze brought a freshness he hadn't felt in a long time. The sky was clear, and the stars shone brightly. He stopped to look up, feeling small in the vastness of the universe. "Maybe I'm looking for answers where there are no questions," he thought. As time passed, Samuel began to engage more actively in the village meetings. He realized that by supporting his neighbors and listening to their concerns, he was also finding meaning in his own life. The young man began to understand that his journey didn't have to be solitary. Mutual support could be the way to overcome adversities. By opening up to others and sharing his fears, he felt that he was, in some way, contributing to a greater purpose. However, as the interactions in the village became more meaningful, the pressure on Samuel increased. He constantly found himself reminded of the expectations weighing on his shoulders. Each day, the doubt grew more intense. Am I really prepared for this? What if I fail? These questions followed him like shadows, but they also urged him to seek answers. The difficulties that arose, though they seemed simple at first, proved to be complex and challenging. The food shortage led to discussions about how to share what was left, and tensions began to surface. Samuel found himself caught in the middle of a conflict between two groups in the village, each believing they had the solution to the problems. We need to be rational, he tried to argue. We can't let fear divide us. But his words seemed to fall on deaf ears in the face of the frustration and despair that permeated the air. With each conversation and every conflict, Samuel felt more divided. He wanted to be the leader the village needed, but doubts about his own ability continued to torment him. His interactions with Lucas and Anna helped him feel less isolated, but still, the weight of responsibility fell on him. It was a constant internal struggle between the desire to conform to expectations and the need to chart his own path. Meanwhile, the village became a reflection of his journey. The difficulties were far from simple, and the interactions among the inhabitants revealed deep fears and hidden motivations. Samuel became increasingly aware that his search for purpose was intertwined with the collective struggle of his community, and this led him to question whether he would be able to lead amidst the chaos. Weeks passed, and the tension in the village grew like a storm about to burst. Samuel observed more each day the division among the residents. On one side were those who believed they should ration food and preserve resources, while on the other were those who clamored for equal distribution, fearing that the fear of scarcity would lead them to an even greater collapse. He felt the weight of decisions hanging over his shoulders, as if the fate of the village was tied to his ability to act. "You need to take a stand, Samuel," Lucas said urgently as they walked through the village. "People are looking to you. If you don't make a decision, they will think you don't care." Those words cut Samuel like a knife. What did he really want? To be the leader everyone expected, or to stay true to his beliefs? He didn't know. In one of the meetings, Samuel finally had a chance to speak. The atmosphere was tense, voices were raised, and frustration was palpable. "We need to find a solution that works for everyone," he began, trying to control the tremor in his voice. "If we continue like this, the division could destroy what we have." But his words were met with skepticism. "Easy to say, Samuel. What if the food runs out before we can decide?" a woman shouted, her voice heavy with despair. The room fell silent, and Samuel felt his heart race. He was on a tightrope, and the pressure mounted. Outside the meeting, he sat in the shade of a tree, his mind spinning. The words of that woman echoed in his thoughts. The truth was that he didn't have all the answers. Fear and insecurity intertwined in his mind. What if I fail? What if my decisions are wrong? The weight of responsibility became unbearable. He wanted to be a beacon of hope, but felt more lost than ever. Meanwhile, external conflicts intensified. The drought continued to punish the village, and the scarce food led to heated discussions. Samuel watched two men, longtime friends, facing off in the middle of the square. "Do you want our children to starve?" one shouted, anger visible on his face. The other, fists clenched, replied, "I can't just give everything we have to those who aren't trying." The tension was palpable, and Samuel had the feeling that the village was on the brink of collapse. He found himself in a dilemma. Should he intervene? His mind was a storm of doubts, but he also felt he couldn't stand by. He stood up, his voice trembling with nervousness. "Stop! This won't lead us anywhere." His attempt to calm the tempers was met with looks of surprise, but also disdain. "And you, Samuel? What do you know about the pain of not having enough?" A woman turned to him, her eyes filled with tears. He felt his heart tighten. It was true, he didn't know. The words of that woman stayed with him like a scar. He was surrounded by pain and insecurity, but also by a determination to change things. As he walked home that night, the moon shone brightly in the sky, but Samuel felt enveloped in shadows. He looked up at the stars, searching for answers, but what he found was only a deep silence. The discussions in the village were not just about food. They were about hope, trust, and the struggle for a collective identity. Samuel realized that the true battle was not just against scarcity, but against the disunity that threatened to dismantle everything they had built together. He felt a growing weight in his chest, a need to act, but how could he do that without feeling like an imposter? However, there was a spark of determination inside him. During those days of uncertainty, he began to realize that his role was not simply to be a leader, but a catalyst for change. The vulnerability he had feared so much could be the key to uniting his village. He decided that instead of trying to solve everything alone, he would share his insecurities and invite others to join him. If they faced their fears together, perhaps they could find a way to hope. The tension among the villagers was becoming unsustainable, and Samuel knew he needed to act quickly. The first step, he thought, would be to talk to Lucas and Anna again. They needed to join forces, strengthen the bonds of the community, and remind everyone that even in the face of adversity, unity could be the answer. He didn't have all the answers, but he now knew he didn't need to have them. What really mattered was the willingness to listen, learn, and fight together. The next day arrived like an omen. The sun had barely risen behind the mountains, and the village was already in turmoil. The smell of tension hung in the air, and Samuel knew the time to act had come. As he prepared for the meeting that would determine the fate of the village, he felt his heart pounding uncontrollably. The words of the woman who confronted him in the square still echoed in his mind. He didn't know what it was like to go without food, but now he felt the absence of hope. Lucas and Anna arrived early, their faces reflecting the same concern that Samuel carried. "It's today, isn't it?" Lucas asked, his voice laden with a mix of anxiety and determination. Samuel nodded, his throat dry. He knew he had to be honest, not just about his insecurities, but also about the urgency of the situation. "We need to unite, or we will lose everything," he said, feeling more confident as he spoke. But there was a tremor in his voice that seemed to contradict the firmness of his words. Anna, who had always been a voice of reason, looked into Samuel's eyes. "What if we can't? What if the division becomes irreparable?" The question cut through him like a blade. He had no answer. What could he say to these friends who supported him, but also shared the fear of an uncertain future? He took a deep breath, trying to find words that could calm not just them, but himself. The meeting began with a heavy atmosphere. People were willing to listen, but frustration still lingered. Samuel stepped up to the small makeshift platform, feeling the heavy gazes upon him. "We are at a critical moment," he began, his voice hesitant. "I understand that we are all struggling to survive, but we cannot let ourselves be consumed by fear." He hesitated, the words forming in his mind. "I don't have all the answers. I also feel the weight of uncertainty. But the only way for us to overcome this is together." The murmurs that followed were a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "And how can we trust each other when scarcity is so real?" A voice cut through the crowd, and Samuel felt the pressure mount even more. He remembered Anna and Lucas's words. "We need a plan, one that involves everyone. If we ration food fairly and collaboratively, everyone will have what they need. And if we work together, we can find ways to increase production." The reactions were varied. Some nodded, while others shook their heads in disapproval. The mood was shifting, but there was still a clear divide. Samuel looked around, searching for allies. He saw Lucas, who nodded affirmatively, and Anna, who seemed thoughtful. "What if there isn't enough food?" someone shouted, and frustration began to turn into turmoil. Samuel felt his stomach churn. He was about to lose control of the situation, but he couldn't let that happen. "Listen, we need to be creative. Let's split into groups and find solutions. Each of us has different skills. If we all contribute, we can find a way." He felt the weight of responsibility intensify, but also a new energy. The room was filled with voices, and he realized that the division was not just about food, but about the trust that had been lost over time. An elderly woman stood up, her voice trembling but firm. "I lost my daughter in the last drought. I can't stand by while I watch my neighbors destroy each other." The tears in her eyes were a reflection of the pain they all shared. Samuel felt a wave of empathy. Emotions were running high, and the village was divided. But there was a spark of hope. If pain united us once, we can unite again. Let's come together, share our fears and our hopes. Let's work together so that our children have a future. The appeal was like a call to action, and he saw the hesitation on the villagers' faces beginning to dissipate. The mood was shifting, but there was still a long way to go. He knew that the true battle was just beginning. The decisions they would make in the coming days would shape the future of the village, and Samuel felt the weight of that in every fiber of his being. He took a deep breath, feeling determination grow within him. The fight would not be easy, but at least in that moment there was a path ahead. And for the first time, he began to believe that hope could flourish, even amid difficulties. The tension in the room was palpable, as if the air was charged with electricity. When Samuel looked around, he saw faces marked by distrust and pain, but he also noticed a faint glimmer of hope in the eyes of some. He knew that the next hour could determine not only the fate of the village, but his own fate as well. The fight for a better future began there, and he could not back down. "We need to act now," he said, his voice resonating firmly despite the tremor in his hands. "Let's divide the village into groups, each focusing on a specific solution: cultivation, rationing, skill exchange. We need to unite our strengths." He saw a group of young people exchange glances, and their hesitation hit him like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't enough to just talk. He needed to inspire them to act. "Samuel, that's not enough yet," a voice boomed from the back of the room. It was Miguel, one of the most influential leaders of the village, known for his strong rhetoric and ability to galvanize the masses. What if they don't respect the plan? What if greed speaks louder than need? Miguel's words cut through the air like a knife. He was right. Doubt was rooted deep, and Samuel knew the challenge was much greater than simply proposing a plan. "We need a commitment," he replied, his voice more intense, "a pact among all of us. If we are not one, we will perish." The murmurs grew, and Samuel realized time was running out. He remembered the woman who had lost her daughter and how her pain had touched everyone present. "Let's do this for our children," he pleaded, "for those who still have a chance to grow up in a place where solidarity prevails over greed. If we don't fight together, we will be doomed to a cycle of misery." I felt my heart race as I observed the reactions. Miguel's gaze was a storm. "And what if you're wrong, Samuel? What if this unity isn't enough to save us?" The question hung in the air, and everyone was attentive. The silence was deafening. "Then at least we will have tried," Samuel responded, his voice stronger than ever. "At least we will have tried." He looked directly into Miguel's eyes, challenging him to find an argument that wasn't based on fear. "If you believe that hope is an illusion, then tell me, what else can we do?" Miguel hesitated, and the room seemed to be at an impasse. The gaze of the elder villager was also fixed on Samuel, and he realized that the division was, in fact, a reflection of each of their internal struggles. They needed a leader, and perhaps at that moment he was becoming that leader. The tension was almost unbearable, but when Samuel looked at Lucas and Anna, he saw that they were by his side. Lucas nodded affirmatively, and Anna, with a glint of determination in her eyes, raised her hand. "I support Samuel," she declared. "If we all contribute, not only with our skills, but also with our hearts, we can rebuild the trust we have lost." The room began to murmur again, and Samuel felt that a change was in the air. Miguel's expression softened slightly, and he seemed to weigh his words. "What if we take this one step at a time? We can start with a meeting to discuss the tasks and divide responsibilities," Miguel suggested, his voice now more cautious but still full of authority. "It's a start," Samuel agreed, his heart racing. "But we need a commitment, a pact that everyone will be willing to work together not just today, but for as long as it takes to overcome this crisis." One by one, the villagers began to stand up, some still reluctant, others with a new glimmer of determination. The elderly woman who had spoken before raised her hand. "I promise to help, even if it's just with my knowledge of herbs and plants. I can't stand by while I see my neighbors suffer." The voices began to join together, and the atmosphere in the room started to change. The pact began to form, and the idea of a shared future started to blossom among those present. One by one, they began to sign a simple document, a promise of unity. But even as hope began to rise, Samuel knew that the battle was far from won. He felt the weight of the commitment on his shoulders. The consequences of this new alliance were still uncertain, and the true test of strength would come in the days ahead. The room was still filled with anxiety, and he knew that the real challenge was just beginning. Even so, looking at those determined faces, a wave of courage washed over him. He was ready to face whatever came next because, for the first time in a long time, he was not alone. Together, they could find a way forward. The fight for hope and unity was just beginning, and Samuel was prepared to lead them. The room began to empty, but the energy still permeated the air. Samuel felt the adrenaline pulsing through his body as he watched the villagers disperse, now more animated and talking among themselves. The promises made in the meeting echoed in his mind, and he found himself thinking of how many voices had united in that moment. However, the euphoria soon gave way to harsh reality. The struggle was only just beginning. As he walked toward the exit, Samuel noticed Anna and Lucas talking with a group of young people. They were discussing how they could organize the tasks efficiently. The sight of their enthusiasm filled him with pride, but also with a strange anxiety. What would happen when the reality of food scarcity and lack of resources began to bite? Optimism could quickly turn into frustration. "Samuel!" Anna called out to him, her eyes shining with determination. "We need to decide who will be responsible for each group. Do you mind leading the cultivation team? You have the knowledge we need to turn this situation around." He hesitated for a moment. The pressure of the new role was beginning to settle on his shoulders, but the determination in her eyes encouraged him. "Of course, I'll take it," he replied, trying to hide the nervousness in his voice, "and I'll need all of you. Let's create a list of what we need to plant and how we can maximize our space." As they moved away from the center of the village, Samuel reflected on the promises made. Hope now hung over them like an invisible cloak, but he also knew that distrust would not disappear overnight. The wounds of disunity were fresh, and any failure could be the spark for discord. The next morning, Samuel joined a group of villagers to discuss the crops. He was surprised to see Miguel appear, a gesture that seemed to signal a new beginning. The elder leader looked at the young people around him and, in a moment of vulnerability, confessed, "I was wrong to doubt. We need each other, and I'm here to help." Miguel's words were a balm, and Samuel saw the expression of relief on the faces of the villagers. The unity that once seemed so distant was now palpable, a delicate fabric of trust beginning to form. They spent hours discussing, planning, and noting their needs. However, as the days went by, the reality of the situation began to manifest in unexpected ways. The first weeks brought challenges that tested the resilience of the pact. Some villagers, with their old suspicions, began to question the progress. What if we don't have enough crops? What if the division of responsibilities isn't fair? These questions arose during meetings, and Samuel realized that fear was still very present. One morning, during a casual meeting, a woman stood up and expressed her frustration. "We are trying hard, but what do we have to show for it? The fields are empty and food is scarce. What will we do if there is no harvest?" Samuel felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had become a symbol of hope, but also of expectation. "We are at the beginning of rebuilding," he replied, trying to convey confidence. "Unity takes time, but we must remember what we have achieved together. Every small step counts. His words resonated in the room, but he knew it was only part of the answer. He needed to act and show that hope was not just an abstraction, but something tangible. In the days that followed, Samuel began to work with the youth, encouraging them to cultivate not only the land, but also the mindset that collaboration was essential. They began to implement small skill exchanges, and soon the crops began to show signs of life. The first green shoots emerged, bringing new energy to the village. The smiles on the faces of the villagers seeing the results of their teamwork were contagious. Conversations began to shift from distrust to celebration, and the space that was once filled with pain was now becoming fertile ground for new hopes. As he watched the villagers come together to tend to the crops, Samuel realized that the seeds of change were being sown not only in the soil, but also in their hearts. The journey was just beginning, but the commitment they had made could finally bear fruit. The struggle for a better future was becoming a reality, and Samuel knew that although the challenges were great, they were ready to face them together. Samuel watched the green shoots stand out against the arid soil, reflecting on how, amid despair, faith and unity had proven stronger than doubts. As days turned into weeks, the village began to flourish, not only in its crops, but also in its community bonds. He remembered the promises made during that initial meeting and how, with joint effort, they were getting closer to what seemed impossible. The trust that Miguel had brought by joining the group of young people spread like a fire, consuming uncertainty. The once divided villagers now supported one another, sharing not only the work, but also their hopes and fears. Samuel understood that the journey was not yet complete. There was much to be done, but the transformation was already visible. However, despite the joy that the harvest promised, Samuel could not ignore the warnings echoing in his mind. He knew that life was full of ups and downs, and that prosperity could be fleeting. Frequently, he remembered the book of Proverbs, where it says that wisdom is more precious than rubies. He decided that, in addition to cultivating the land, it was essential to cultivate wisdom among the people. So, in a new meeting, Samuel spoke about the dangers of complacency. We must be vigilant and grateful. The Lord has given us the opportunity to start anew, but we cannot forget where we came from and what we have learned. It's easy to get carried away by the joy of the harvest, but we need to remember that true wealth lies in fellowship and justice among us, he said, hoping that his words would take root in everyone's hearts. Time passed, and when the harvest finally arrived, the village was ready. The fields, once desolate, were now filled with fruits and vegetables. The villagers celebrated, their gratitude manifesting in prayers and feasts. Samuel saw the reflection of what God had promised to his people, that as they walked together in unity and faith, he would provide for their needs. In that moment of celebration, Samuel reflected on divine justice. He remembered that just as the land had been restored, the lives and spirit of the community had also been renewed. God's mercy had manifested in every sprout, in every smile, in every act of solidarity. He realized that by coming together, they had not only cultivated the land, but also a new understanding that they were part of something greater. God's love and justice were not just concepts, but tangible realities that could be experienced in everyday life. The lessons of the journey became clear. Samuel understood that true freedom and prosperity come from justice and unity. He remembered the words of James, which teach that faith without works is dead, and realized that his faith was manifested through hard work and collaboration. What was once a field of distrust had transformed into a symbol of hope, showing that even in the worst circumstances, God's intervention is made through the willingness of the human heart to work together. That village which was once on the brink of despair, now radiated life, and Samuel, looking at the horizon, knew that the real challenge would be to maintain that unity and continue to cultivate not only the land, but the community. The story of Samuel and his villagers would echo through generations, a reminder that faith, unity, and divine justice are the pillars that support any community. And so, in his reflection, Samuel felt grateful to have been part of that rebirth, knowing that the seeds planted were not just for food, but for hope and love that would endure for a long time. As he watched the sunset over the lush fields that now adorned the village, Samuel felt a deep gratitude welling up in his heart. The transformation he had witnessed was not limited to the land, but extended to the lives and bonds that united those who had once been divided. He realized that the journey they had undertaken together was, in fact, a reflection of the relationship each of them could cultivate with God. Faith was not just an abstract belief, but a daily practice that required obedience, love, and a commitment to justice. Samuel clearly remembered the difficulties they faced, the sleepless nights, the fears that haunted each of them, the uncertainty that loomed over the future. But amid all of this, they chose to trust. They chose to join forces, share the burdens, and most importantly, seek divine guidance. This decision to support one another and trust in God was what sustained them in the darkest hours. He thought about how, just like the sprouts that emerged from the barren land, their lives had also flourished through faith and perseverance. In that moment of reflection, Samuel realized that true obedience to God was not manifested only in words, but in concrete actions. Every gesture of kindness, every act of solidarity, every collective effort to restore the village was an expression of their faith. The transformation they experienced became a living testimony of what it means to be a chosen people, called to live in justice and love. He understood that by maintaining this unity and purpose, they would not only be pleasing to God, but also strengthening themselves as a community. On the other hand, the practical lesson Samuel wished to share was simple, yet profound. In our daily lives, we must cultivate healthy and just relationships, just as we cultivate the land. This implies being willing to listen, to help, and to walk alongside our neighbor, especially in times of difficulty. Life in community requires effort and commitment, but the fruits are abundant when everyone works together for the greater good. The story of his village became a reminder that even in times of crisis, hope can be reborn when we unite in faith and action. Samuel's gaze lingered on the children playing in the fields, innocent and carefree. He smiled, for he knew they were bequeathing a legacy of hope and love, an inheritance that transcended mere survival. The message was clear: true wealth lies in the love and justice we cultivate with one another. What was once a desert had become an oasis, and Samuel, looking at the horizon, felt certain that with God ahead, his village would continue to flourish. The narrator then concludes that the story of Samuel and his villagers is a powerful illustration of how faith, unity, and divine justice can transform lives and communities. The central message is that as we walk together in love and obedience to God, we not only face life's challenges, but also become instruments of His peace and hope in the world. True transformation begins in the heart, and just like the green sprouts that emerged from the barren land, our lives can blossom amid difficulties, reflecting the beauty of divine love.